Everybody, welcome back to the Insiders Lounge. Today we have another episode and another special guest. Brian, thank you for joining me and feel free to introduce yourself.
Absolute pleasure. I'm Brian Crookham. I'm the Rapids 2 GM and the Senior Director of Soccer Development with the Colorado Rapids. So I oversee the daily operations of our second team, all the player movement that goes from our first team to our second team to our academy and back and forth there. Involved in scouting and anything else that comes with a catch-all title like soccer development. So I guess that's me at the Rapids right now.
I want to get started with your journey. It started in Oklahoma. That's a bit of a unique starting point for someone that's working in soccer. I'd love to hear about your initial childhood memories and maybe some of your first memories around the game.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I grew up in Jenks, Oklahoma, and when I was a kid, I was kind of torn becoming a pilot or a coach, teacher, that kind of thing. And, initially when I was in the sport, I mean, that was almost 50 years ago now. So I'd signed up for soccer like a lot of people as a young kid, but people wouldn't have thought of Oklahoma as a soccer hotbed. And when I first signed up, there wasn't much else in support of that, but very quickly, a couple of years after I started playing in the late 70s, the Tulsa Roughnecks came to town with the NASL. And so there was actually a pro soccer presence in our community. And what that meant is not only did you get to go see pro soccer games, but you also got to grow up with the kids of pro soccer players and be coached by pro soccer players. And those guys became part of and are quite frankly still a part of the community in Tulsa. And so for me, I think my initial thoughts of playing soccer were it was a free-flowing game. I remember just being out and fun and free, and nobody made all the decisions for you, and you ran around. But the concrete pieces of it and things that maybe solidified my love for the game probably related a lot to the fact that we were able to see it at a very high level with some guys that were quite accomplished in the game in a little town like Tulsa, Oklahoma.
We'll get more into the footballing side, but first you mentioned the flying side, and that when we had our initial conversation, I was so fascinated by it because you completed your first solo flight at, I believe, 16 years old. So I want to get into sort of your flying family, how you got into it, and some stories around that.
Yeah, I grew up at an airport. My grandfather flew. My father flies and has been a part of it. My father was also a certified flight instructor, which he didn't do full time, but it was part of his passion. And we had a couple airplanes in the family when I was a kid, and so I grew up in a hangar around airplanes and all that, and I really loved it. And probably more than my siblings, it was something that I for a while thought I was going to pursue, and I started flying with my father, and he was my instructor. And one day I was out flying with him. We landed at a little grass airstrip out in the middle of nowhere in Oklahoma, and he literally opened the door and got out and said, "Look, don't crash or your mom will kill me." And I just remember there was no break, there was no thought, I just got on it, took off. I remember kind of leveling off and flying straight, and just this unbelievable sense of freedom that I had at that moment. And came around, landed, picked up my dad, and we went on with our day. And it probably took me 20 years to realize what must have gone into that moment to make me comfortable with just doing it without thinking much. And certainly as a father now, what it must have taken my dad to be comfortable with just getting out of the airplane and let your son go do that. Oddly enough, my 19-year-old son soloed this weekend, so he became fourth generation of guys that had soloed in our family. And there's still that kind of feeling like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. So for him to feel comfortable, there had to have been a process that came out with that. And it took me, I was getting ready to speak to a group of coaches, and we were talking about letting players make decisions. And I was trying to come up with something that I could get to. And I was in a hotel room, and for some reason it just hit me. It was like, I can't imagine what my dad in the process, and how you start out with it's got to be a command style, right? You got to say, do this, do this, do this, or we're going to crash. And then that evolves into, maybe asking some more questions. And as the student gets more comfortable, they have to understand what the process is, why the process is happening. And if you don't do it well, what are the consequences for that? And then eventually it becomes maybe a little nudge, asking a quick question, a reminder, that kind of thing. And then there becomes a point where you're just sitting back and observing and giving a little feedback, but you watch the show go. And I think from a coaching standpoint, that's really relevant to, what we do, especially in a free flowing game like soccer. You give ideas, you might want things done in technique. It might be a little more concrete than in decision making, and you evolve. And so it was really related to what I do on a daily basis, but I didn't realize that for probably 20 years. And I was telling my dad that, and I'm not sure he sees it related to what I do today, but I promise it is.
No, I think it's so key where you see some coaches tend to over critique, and then you see the best in the world where the Monday to Friday, or sort of your weekly training, that's where the critiquing is done. But then on a weekend, on a match day, you tend to just see them sit back and let the players work it out. And that's part of the process, I think, of growing as a player.
Yeah. And through that whole process, you've got to let somebody start to make a mistake and maybe pull them back or whatever. And as long as the failure is not fatal, it's a big learning process and a big part of the learning process. So, it's funny how there's coaching in so many other areas of our lives that you wouldn't necessarily think of right away.
One of the initial questions I always like to get to know about a person is their views or their thoughts on education as a whole, but specifically their education, because I think everyone sort of takes a different route and there's many forms of education. So I'd love to dive into your education, even from a young age, but especially through university, but then also on the coaching side and more on the footballing side as well.
Yeah, I think it's multifaceted, the education, and it's something I've always recognized that you need. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in formalized education that maybe the things that you have to go experience outside of a classroom, or maybe people that have a lot of formal education but don't get the exact same feel for it, don't recognize as well. So from my standpoint, I was pretty typical where especially at that time, where I went to high school, I went to college, I studied education and biology, and thought I was going to be a teacher for the rest of my life. But what I realized very quickly was that the real life experiences were what was really driving my development. And I did all the things to check the boxes over a long period of time to get a degree, but because that was necessary. When you go into teaching, you have to be formally educated to do it. But what I was really fortunate to have happen was along the way, I was able to pick up a job as a junior varsity soccer coach, then a varsity soccer coach, and I was substitute teaching. So I was getting real world experience while I was still going through the formal education process of that. On the coaching side, I also had some mentors that immediately got me into coaching education. And part of the give back on them assisting with paying for the coach education was having to teach. And so I got both sides of that. And I think every time you teach a course, you also, learn from somebody, learn a piece of something. And so the feedback loop of that was quite incredible for me. So while I saw the formal education piece of it, the importance of that in the field that I thought I was going to be in for the rest of my life, I also think that I was really lucky to get more of the practical piece of it, with some great people around me and great mentors early on that were able to set a good foundation for the way I developed and have developed and continue to develop throughout my career.
You mentioned that aspect of teaching is such a great way of learning. And I think you realize that once you start to teach something. I want to dive into that a little bit more. You obviously got to teach a few courses. What were some of the other aspects or unique features of teaching that you actually felt benefited you, whether it was new contacts or just a new thought pattern towards the courses as a whole?
I think in teaching, especially when you're teaching something like coaching courses, your ideas get challenged. You're not teaching students that are in a high school that are just going to maybe put their hand up if they don't quite understand. These are people that are quite successful in other areas of life too. They might be volunteer coaches, but they might also be doctors or lawyers or somebody that runs a business and have the time to coach. And part of the reason they have the time to coach is because they've been successful in other pieces, and they challenge your ideas. And so I think first and foremost, the preparation. You can't go in and just say, well, I'm going to tick the box today and get this lecture done. You've got to be able to be in there, be prepared, be dynamic, be selling the information that you have as well, and engaging. Because if you just become a teacher at the front of the classroom that's monotone and you're just literally getting through the classwork, you're not going to be an effective person that can transfer information. And so if you can come out that way, you can also affect the students. And then when you affect the students, they affect a bigger group of people. And so I think I always recognize or try to recognize the fact that when you have an audience, you have a real opportunity not just to affect the audience, but to affect a greater group of people that are affected by that audience. And so the preparation, the content, the depth is always so important when you start to approach any type of teaching venture there.
When we look back at anyone's journey, really, you see these vital people that were a part of their life that helped them sort of make that next step, whatever it was in their career. And you mentioned on our call previously, you had Mike Dunlap as one, your uncle and your father. So I would love to dive into each of those figures and how they impacted your journey.
Yeah, I'll kind of go in reverse order. Obviously, I talked about my father and my parents in general. To be honest with you, I had a very fortunate upbringing where I didn't want for a lot. I had the ability to go out and chase my dreams. Let's be honest. It's I, like a lot of people in my situation at that time, it was this pretty straightforward pathway for me, and my parents were a big part of that. I mentioned my uncle because my uncle was a football coach, high school American football coach in Oklahoma. Ended up getting in the Coaches Hall of Fame. Was a really talented person himself, really passionate about not just sport, but the people that he was able to affect. And he taught his last big stint in teaching. He was in a couple of more inner city schools, and so the breadth of people that he came across, that he affected across a lot of demographics, I think was really impressive, and it really made me think about maybe how I could make an impact in that, and that's probably where I honed in a bit on the coaching and teaching part of it as I went forward. So massive influence there, and seeing his players come to his house and do their laundry or hang out because they didn't have any other father type influences at times was pretty impactful to me, and I always felt like I could maybe do that, and so that's what kind of led me off in that direction. And you mentioned Mike Dunlap, and I told the story to you when we first spoke about that, but I think Mike was the men's basketball coach at Metro State College when I was there, and went on to win a couple national championships. Went on and coached in professional basketball for a long time, top levels of collegiate basketball, and he's still great stuff today. Go follow him on Twitter and or X or whatever we call it these days. But from a really practical sense, I got to watch him work because I was an assistant athletic director and got to go to the NCAA Final Four. And he probably helped me solidify one of the most important principles that I have in working with our programs in any programs. And there's a concept of kind of creating translators for your message. And we were sitting at the Final Four, and I was sitting at the scores table watching him practice right before the Final Four, and he had one kid that he was just all over, and it was tense, and it was right before a big game, and Mike's on the kid, and the kid finally just breaks, and he walks away, and he walks back down the court, but one of the other players grabbed him and walked him around and said, "Look, all he wants you to do is be great tomorrow night and help us win a national championship. We've done this all year." And he provided translation, maybe a kid that relates a little bit more to him than the coach did, or had a similar background, a more similar background, somebody that could speak in figuratively in the same language as the player that was struggling a little bit with the information. And so when you have a core that understands who you are, and then understands where the message has to go, it makes your job a lot easier in providing that information. And to watch that at work and see somebody in such a big moment. And they went on that weekend to win a national championship, by the way. And to watch that process work so close and so well really impacted me. And I think it's something you can take on. And it's not just a sports team thing. It is an office thing. It is running a business thing. It is something that has allowed me to speak to other groups that are not sport related organizations and talk about organizational communication and the things that go on there. So, yes, there are probably 10 more examples of people in my life that have had impactful things, but that was certainly a big moment there. So there's a ton of people that have had that type of influence on me, but that's a pretty good example.
I wanted to dive into, I've sort of had this new thought pattern where we always look at people older than us and we sort of try and grab inspiration from them or ways that we can try and develop whatever we're working on to be more like them. But I think we can almost reverse this. So if we go back to Brian, let's say as a high school coach in Oklahoma, what are some things that you can look back at that version of Brian and use as inspiration today to maybe help rejuvenate or find a new way to coach or manage or whatever your day-to-day looks like now that you can sort of grab as inspiration from him?
Well, it's really easy for me. It was underscored yesterday when I got a picture of one of those high school players that 30 years ago I'm coaching, and he's sending me pictures of their new baby and the connection. Probably that group, one of my first groups, is probably one of the groups that I have the deepest connections with still today. And I think that as you progress, sometimes things can get a little transactional. It's part of what I have to do to get this done, or you take on more responsibility where you feel like you got 1,000 things going on, other people looking to you, not just your players, but other staff or, other things in the world. And I think the one thing that stands out to me with that question is that the players that I coached at that time period in my life, I had the most time for as well. And I think that makes the biggest difference. And it's something that as I evolved in my career, I think I had periods where I didn't make as much time for those kids, and the connections are different now. And so it becomes reflecting on that and saying, how do I do a better job of giving that time? And it's not only when the work gets going. I also used to be single. I used to not have kids. I used to, and so how do you continue to be effective at your job as responsibilities, both in the business world and in the personal world, become greater and pull at you in different directions? And something I probably always struggle with, but I do recognize that there was a time where that was my closest family, and I probably treated it that way. And the results are pretty obvious there.
You ended up we were speaking about Metro State, and you became the assistant athletic director, and you mentioned some of the impacts that had where you're trying to build on your coaching journey at that time, and maybe becoming an athletic director isn't necessarily the number one priority or sort of that next step that you saw, but it ended up teaching you a lot more about some of the things that you work day to day now. So I'd love to hear some of the memories that you have about that time.
Yeah, I think when I went in as assistant AD, I was just trying to make a living at that stage, and I ended up with the NCAA compliance piece, which if anybody that's been in an American school knows how critical that is to the function of an athletic department at the collegiate level, and we were a school that were ambitious at the time enough to think we were going to go chase national championships, and did chase and win national championships in multiple sports. To do that, you have to be really buttoned up on the rules side and the compliance side and all of that. So we did a total revamp of that, which I headed up. And what I came out of that with was a real appreciation for process and how we look at, evaluate needs, look at how we're going to put programs in place to ensure that our needs are met in those areas, and ensure that there's a feedback loop that means if you start to waver or go off the process, that you can get back on track or you can evolve there. And so, tearing something down, restarting from scratch was really, I think, beneficial for me in the way I look at building a program, and my first role here was all about creating an entire process for player development, and I think that experience was unbelievably valuable for me, to be able to step in and look at how we wanted to build here.
When we were discussing your career, you mentioned that your first time involved with the MLS was actually on the media side. But I'm curious, that was, I think we said almost 20 years ago, if I'm getting my time right. So I'd love to hear.
Yeah.
not to age you. I don't want to age you there.
Yeah,
but,
I know what you're saying there.
but
That
if
was
we
a
look
long time ago.
if we look 20 years ago and we compare it to today, I would love to hear, because I think you can give a true reflection on how the league has changed, how soccer has changed in this country. So I would love to hear your opinion on that actual change over the 20 years.
Yeah, and you're right. When I started, we were in a weird period. We were about to go back and see the league expand a little bit. Right after I kind of started, it was Chivas USA and Real Salt Lake coming into the league, but we'd also just been in a part of the league's history where we had contraction, where teams had gone away for a bit, and there was, they'd kind of survived that area. We're starting to go again, but coaching staffs were really small. Two guys, maybe a part-time goalkeeper coach, some guy that threw dumbbells up in the air, and that was your strength coach or whatever. And fortunately, they did it really well here with smaller staffs, but it was a different place. The scouting staff was the coaching staff generally, and when the draft was coming up, the coaches were trying to figure out if they could fly out after a game to go watch a college player they were really interested in, and that stuff. Now it's we've gone from what I would say was probably in the 30s or 40s in employees to 150 type employees, around 120 type employees. And so the scale of what we're doing was bigger. When you relate it specifically to the media piece of it, we were paying for airtime at that stage, trying to get the product on the air and being part of it. Now we have a group like Apple paying us to have the rights to do it. And we're also building out entire digital staffs that supports that Apple relationship and all the things and all the content that we can get out. And in an age of social media and a real difference in the way people devour that content, our delivery methods have really evolved. And so the league, both on the technical side and on the commercial side, is just a totally different beast these days. And it's been quite amazing. And that doesn't even take into account, the millions of dollars and time and the investment that's going into the player development side of what's happening in the league right now.
I'm curious, you seem to have this knack for wanting to learn and grow in new interests. So like we mentioned there, you were involved in the media side, you became the athletic director at your school. You were coaching, but then you're also teaching coaching courses. You have all these sort of different avenues. Where did that interest or where did that idea come from that you sort of realized like, okay, if I can generalize myself, this can help me later on. And I think in your role now, it's sort of now pulling together all these different strings that you've been pulling at throughout your career all into one bucket.
Yeah, I don't know where it came from, but I think there's a definite sense of necessity. I'm not the most talented guy in the world. And I know that. So what I have to do is make sure I'm as prepared and able to evolve with. We just talked about how much this league has evolved, and if you are not able to do that, and inherited thinking sets in, this is the way we've done it for years, then you stagnate. And in a fast moving environment like this, it's going to move right past you. And I think I've always just seen that. I think I've always felt like, work ethic was part of how you get to the top. And part of that is making sure that you're putting in the time to learn, to take on more, to make sure that you're up to date with methodology. I mean, we talked about the difference in coaching staffs from MLS in the early days to now. I mean, now if you're a coach that can't integrate video and data and some of the things that come with the increased resources and tools that are being given to the league, you're going to fall behind fast, and you're going to drop off the face of it. And so I think it's always just been maybe a recognition that it's necessity to evolve, and the best way to evolve is keep working really hard and take on board information as you can. And if you can put yourself, again, go back to the formal versus the informal education, but if you can put yourself around people that are progressive thinkers, that are at the top of their profession, then even that passive sometimes transfer of information can be a massive benefit to you.
I'd like to discuss your transition from Colorado youth soccer to the Rapids. I think it was an interesting sort of perspective where you were working alongside just the youth side and then ended up shifting into the Rapids organization. Can we speak on your roles and how that sort of transition occurred?
Yeah, I had a period where I'd come out of the college game, and I was working essentially in coach education in the Olympic development program. And I think that it definitely had an influence when I came in, because I think what probably the biggest recognition was that there's a 1%. There's a 1% of people that are insanely talented and intrinsically motivated to be successful in the sport. That is what I've evolved to, is to dealing with those types of players. And when you work in the youth side, you realize that there are a lot of players that really love the sport, that want to be a participant in the sport. But despite what mom and dad might want or see or wish for their child, they're not necessarily that talented, or they might be talented, but they're not very motivated to go down that pathway. And so I think that was the biggest thing that was a recurring theme was, there are players that need everything you can give to that top 1%. And there are a lot of players, if we're doing the best for the sport and growing the sport, that need to be able to come out several times a week in a safe environment, play, enjoy it with their friends, feel like they're progressing at the level of their friends. But that's all the pressure they really need in there. And that's not up to me or mom or dad to determine. That's really up to the player, and again, their level of talent, their level of motivation. So I think that was probably the biggest takeaway in working in that space for a bit, was that as we needed a place for those people to go and separate themselves, and I think that's where Major League Soccer came in and filled a void, and has picked up the responsibility there on the elite level player development side.
You were a part of building out the Rapids Academy. And at the time, we look at MLS clubs today, and they're these massive organizations with a lot of support around them. But back then, you were sort of more in that startup stage where you didn't know if this was fully going to work. Did you ever have that fear of failure where you could be a part of something here that might not be working out? And how did you approach kind of those early stages of building the academy and building those early infrastructures?
That's a great question. No, I don't think I had time for fear. I think we had a project that we needed to get off the ground and go for it. I think it was always that this is a massive opportunity. It's something that, and I came in at the very start, not only of what we were doing here with the Rapids, but also what we were doing with Major League Soccer. So it was a total blank slate. There wasn't really a blueprint. We weren't really dealing with any inherited thinking in the way we went at it. But like I just talked about, we needed to find a product for that 1% that is, or less than 1%, that's highly talented and highly motivated. And so in the approach of that, just trying to, I'd studied a lot of academies, done a lot of traveling, and looked all over the world at some groups that had successful player development models, and came back here, took the best of what we thought could maybe translate well to what we were doing, tried to put the pathway in place, either because we directly could influence or we could partner to influence it. So maybe our intake came from local youth clubs, because we can't have our hands on every player that comes out. So you're relying on a top of the funnel type piece that is not under your control. We got to a point where kind of that college age player that wasn't quite ready for a contract, but with MLS, but was really talented, needed something in there. The college game served that. The PDL type teams served a purpose in that. And until we could get to a point where we had a second team, we had to build those relationships and, partner to complete the pathway if we didn't have the ability to do it ourselves. So it was looking at what we needed all the way across the board to complete that, and then maybe going back and saying, all right, well, we can't do this right now, but we can utilize partnerships to get there. And so I think that's the way we approached it from day one. And, we were talking before, but I literally was given a ticket sales cubicle and a piece of paper and a pencil and a little pat on the back and said, good luck with this. And so there wasn't a whole lot of time for fear of failure. It was about, let's go get this done, and let's take advantage of the opportunity we've been given here.
I keep throwing these numbers out. I hate to do it to you, but you've now been with the Rapids for, I believe, around 17 years. And for someone like me, it's more of it's a fascination that you can do something for that long. And so I'd love to hear some of your insights on like loyalty and relationship building, because in order for anything to last 17 years is quite impressive. And so I'd love to hear kind of how you've been able to nurture that relationship and grow together as a club and an individual.
Yeah, I mean, loyalty is massively important. And yeah, I think I've been pretty loyal to the organization, but I'm also really grateful for the opportunity that the organization has given me. And that builds that loyalty. And, so a lot of that stuff, it comes from things that happen outside the field. When your family goes through a challenge, having the support of the organization. In our situation, I worked here through COVID. And we all still had jobs, and we all still had paychecks, and we all still, a company that stood by us. And I think that loyalty comes from feeling valued and also continually given opportunities to grow. We talked about it with the players, that if they're enjoying what they're doing, they're progressing at the rate of their peers, and there's opportunities to continue to grow, there's a great chance we're going to retain them. And I think that's exactly the same thing as we look at employees in an organization. If you feel like you're enjoying what you do, if you like the people you work with, if you feel that you have a purpose within the organization and that you're able to continue to move forward, then hopefully you're going to look internally when you need a new challenge. And if that opportunity is there, again, there's a great chance of being retained. So that loyalty is two ways, and it certainly, for me, is something where I have had opportunities to move on and to go to other things that are pretty exciting opportunities. But I've always had the ability to progress within this organization to this point. And so I'll always look internally first if I do need a new challenge. And hopefully I can help create an environment for our employees that give them that same feeling. And then when they can't get that same challenge here, be able to help them go on to the next one.
So we're speaking on Colorado Rapids as an organization. What differentiates the Rapids to other organizations in the MLS? You mentioned having those other opportunities. So you mentioned kind of the loyalty side in that relationship, but what are other ways where you feel that you guys truly differentiate yourselves?
Well, I think in the areas that I deal with, which is a lot about player development and the connection of the club from top to bottom, from the academy to the first team and vice versa, I think our ability to demonstrate a clear pathway for players, whatever their entry point is, we know that we can give them a direct pathway into not only professional soccer, but the top level of professional soccer in our country. And we also know that we've demonstrated the fact that we will utilize those young players and play them. And so the PowerPoints that you create at the very beginning of this, when you haven't done any of it, they've now come into practice. And we have 7 homegrowns regularly in our 20-man roster. And we've got one out on international absence and one out on injury, but the other 5 are going to contribute this week to our team. They will play minutes. They will be part of what we're doing. So when you're able to demonstrate that that players can come in, if they're talented enough, if they're motivated enough, the environment and the pathway will allow them to achieve what they want to achieve here. That gives us a bit of a leg up, I think. And fortunately, our ownership group, our leadership group, with Borg Smith and Wayne Brandt here on site, these guys are fully bought in, and our drive to youth is part of our ethos, and that gives us a real a sense of who we are, and we're excited that we're seeing that pay off for a lot of these players.
We'll get into I call them the Insider's Lounge favorites, just some questions that get more in depth on who you are rather than some of the things you do and so on. So first off, what brings you joy and fulfillment in life, whether it's your family, friends, just something that's unique to you that you enjoy?
Yeah, I think it's changed a lot throughout my career, but I think at this stage, obviously success at work is I spend a lot of time at work, and that's important. But I think now, family, I realize how lucky I am I just celebrated 28th anniversary with my wife, Michelle, and that's not necessarily easy or common in this line of work. And certainly I'm proud of having 3 kids that are all doing what I feel are great things as well. I'm a proud dad and very biased. But, I think for me, I can go to bed every night thinking that if something happened and I didn't wake up, I've tried the best for my family. And then I also know that if I wake up in the morning, there's a hell of a lot to get done today, and I can go on. But I think, that dynamic now is probably the most important thing from a fulfillment side in life.
What is your most valuable asset? So that can be a skill set, mindset, an attitude, something that you find unique about yourself that has made you successful.
I don't know if it's unique. I mean, I think a lot of people that are in positions like this probably have that drive to get it done, to show up every day. Just be there and be ready to go every day. On top of that, listening, being willing to sacrifice, and work hard. And I think it'll always earn you more opportunities. So I don't know that there's anything special. I think it's just something that everybody could do. But it's being present and being there and being dialed in on what you feel like needs to get done for the day, and bringing that every single day. I was able to coach and be a part of the career of Pablo Mastroeni, who's now the coach at Real Salt Lake. And I used to love what he would say when he signed his new contract with us. He said, the thing he's most excited about is looking forward to getting in his car and thinking about how he's going to be the best player at practice that day, instead of worrying about the media or the World Cup or the contract negotiations or any of that. And I think it's that simple. When you show up at work today, can you be the best person there? And if you aren't that day, you're probably making a good effort to be there, and that'll make you successful. So that's probably a big one for me.
We mentioned this idea that the football industry, I think especially other industries can be similar, but I would say football or soccer as a whole, you sort of have this roller coaster of emotions where it's like a win, then a loss, then you've lost these players. Now there's this constant roller coaster effect of emotions. What is one setback or downtime that you've had that you're now able to reflect back at and sort of use that as motivation moving forward?
Well, I'll go back to what we talked about earlier, where I got frustrated at the end of my college coaching stint, because it felt like I could make a difference to the organization. I felt like I could make a difference to the soccer program. But I allowed myself to kind of get overwhelmed with the responsibilities of trying to do both. And then it hurts your ability to manage relationships, and the frustration that comes with that, not feeling like you're good enough. You feel like you can do, but you don't feel like you can, you have the time or the energy or the enough hours in the day to get it all done. And that doesn't count anything outside of work. And I think being able to reflect on that and try to be more choosy about not getting your plate too full right now is massive. And there's hundreds of things where you go, man, I learned from that because I didn't get that right, or failed in one area, and now we won't fail again in that area. There's a lot of examples like that, but I do think that's the biggest thing, is how do you manage your workload so that you are able to really give time to the things that are actually important, both for you and for your organization, and being successful.
And if someone's listening in now, they've listened to sort of your career journey, they might be inspired by some of the things you're working on, the position you're in. I'd love to hear a piece of advice for someone that's aspiring to work in the soccer industry and reach the highest levels of it.
Yeah, as you can imagine, get this question just about every single day. And I think taking any opportunity you have to be around difference makers in the industry is massive, and you can't worry about the money. You have to understand the sacrifice, and I think in some sense you got to not think about it as sacrifice. You think about it as something you want to do because you seek that lifestyle, and you want that to be part of you. And if that is the way your mindset is, then it's not actually sacrifice. It's well, all right, yeah, I don't go out on Friday nights because I'm watching game film, or whatever that thing that you missed your cousin's wedding. Well, that's reality sometimes in what we do, because it can be a consuming industry. You do have to have balance. You do have to have an outlet, but you have to come in with that mentality, because in the end, if you're not totally bought in and it's not for you, that's fine. To be honest with you, there's no problem with that. Nobody's going to judge you for that, but it might not be the career that you need to be in, because you can't just have everything. And so get yourself around decision makers and difference makers, and see if you can move a cone for them so that you get one more step in. And then moving a cone becomes setting up an exercise, which becomes doing a warm up, which becomes part of the staff. And just do what you have to put yourself around people that have like goals and interests, and can help move you forward.
I love this quote, and it says, "You're crazy until you make it." And it's the idea that you can set these goals, and people always go, "Oh, he's crazy. It's never going to happen. It's not a thing." But until you make it, and then all of a sudden they glorify you for what you've done. So I'm curious if you have a goal in mind or something that you've set yourself towards now for the it can be the near future or even longer term that people might look at you now and go, "Man, he's crazy. There's no way he's going to complete it," until you actually do.
Yeah, I don't know that it's a crazy. I think I'm crazy in general, so that's two separate things there. But I guess I think in the end, the goal is to work in a club where winning championships with homegrown players that are contributing to those championships, and that's pretty straightforward. And I don't feel like I need to go too far outside of those parameters right now because it's something I believe in. It's something I believe I can influence, and it's something that I'm pretty desperate to be a part of as we go forward here.
And if we look at your career as a whole, what is the legacy you want to be known for? What is the one thing you want to be known for at the end of it?
Probably just he showed up to work every day and worked hard for everybody around him. I don't think there's one stake in the ground. Obviously, we've been really fortunate here to have an influence on not only building out a player development program, but we've got one that influences how we play on the weekend, who plays on the weekend, and has influenced the quality of our roster. And so in this piece of my career, being able to be a part of that, small part of that, with a lot of people that I've been fortunate enough to work with is great. But we haven't won enough championships. We haven't. We're nowhere near done. So I don't know. That's where I am right now on that.
I mentioned one of my favorite quotes there, so I want to hear yours now. We'll wrap up with some quick fire questions. So the first is, what is your favorite quote, something that you live by or that you really enjoy hearing?
And I think it's influenced by things that I've seen or been part of in my career. But the man who rows the boat generally doesn't have time to rock it. I think when you get in and you are a difference maker, you probably don't have time to stir up the rest of the noise that detracts from what you're doing.
And if someone's headed to Colorado, you've obviously been there for a few years. So besides a Rapids game, what are the top recommendations? What's something that either a food spot or just something that you really enjoy about the state?
Red Rocks. Got to get out to Red Rocks. Got to take in a concert. Maybe a little motorcycle ride through there. I like to take the motorcycle through there, but no doubt, iconic spot and something you got to see.
Are you a big reader? Do you have a favorite book or one that you recommend?
I'm a forced reader. I feel it's important to read, and I've gotten better at it over the years. But I don't know. I've actually gone back to reread some things, things that maybe influenced me in the past. If I had to throw out something right now, there's a book by William Damon called Greater Expectations, and I think having a flip through that. It's a little bit older, but unbelievably relevant.
If you weren't in your current profession, where do you think you'd be?
I'd be a pilot.
Yeah, I think that was nailed down.
I'd be the one flying around the world. I already fly around the world. I would be the one that's actually doing the flying.
And if you had one person that you could sit down with for a meal, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Yeah, I mean, it might not be interesting to everybody else, but there's no question it would be my mom, who passed a decade ago, and I think she'd be pretty interested to hear what my kids are doing right now. So it's not a really exciting one for everybody else, but it'd be a really important one for me.
No, that's a great way to end things here. Brian, I appreciate your time. If you have any last words, feel free, and then we'll wrap things up.
No, I hope that if people are looking at getting into the industry and they have questions, they'll look us up and hit us up, whether it be through email or whatever, social media. Sometimes I respond to that kind of thing, but definitely would say that we need we need some good, dedicated people in a very growing part of the sport industry in Major League Soccer, and excited to talk to anybody that has questions or wants some ideas on how they can get it done.
Appreciate it. I look forward to speaking again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for having me, and you guys are doing a great job.